$1 billion, and we will pay you for use of music on our networks going forward. $1 billion will buy peace. The labels refused, with the result that in the short term, they destroyed Napster, but in the longer term, they produced 1 million other Napsters in its place, with the result not in a reduction of piracy, for it turns out that the one thing that we know about internet users is they don't know how to read Supreme Court opinions, because that's the place where the United States Supreme Court finally declares that this file sharing is illegal. Instead, what it produces is an increase in, quote, criminals, otherwise known as terrorists. Now, it's completely obvious this would happen, given the internet. Yet policymaking went on as if there were no internet here. Or think of another example, the WikiLeaks example. Obviously, there was lots of harmful information that was released because of what WikiLeaks released when WikiLeaks released the State Department cables. But it should be recognized here that there was first an offer by WikiLeaks to the government, asking the government to review what they had and what they intended to release, and to tell them what really could not be released if the safety of important assets was to be preserved. The government refused. Instead, the government, like the labels in Napster, targeted WikiLeaks to destroy it with rhetoric from our government about traitor. Of course, Julian Assange is not an American, so can't be a traitor. Threatening the death penalty, despite the fact we can't actually kill people for anything less than murder. Or war criminal. A little bit hard to see how there was a war criminal going on here, but that was their charge. And with efforts to disable it by encouraging all the infrastructure companies supporting WikiLeaks to disappear from the scene, bullied away by people like Vice President Biden or Senator Joe Lieberman, with the result that in the short term, they might destroy WikiLeaks, but with the longer term, producing 1 million other WikiLeaks in its stead. Some of them are better. OpenLeaks, I think, is a better infrastructure for facilitating this information, but lots of them worse. The Guardian reported just this week, hackers, in response to this behavior, are being radicalized and launching extraordinarily powerful new attacks in response to this behavior. Now, again, it's completely obvious this would happen, given the internet. Yet policymaking goes on here as if there were no internet. In both cases, we could be smarter. Assume there is harm here. Assume piracy is harmful, although, of course, there's a little bit of skepticism growing about the real harm from piracy, and this report by the SSRC concludes that media piracy has been called a global scourge, international plague, and nirvana for criminals, but it is probably better described as a global pricing problem. And we can assume that WikiLeaks is harmful, although it's a little bit hard to see the spring that's broken out in the Arab area because of the information entitled and spread by this release as harmful. But even assuming there's harm here, that's not the point. The question is, how do we respond to the harm? And we begin by acknowledging something here that governments must acknowledge. Here it is. There is an internet. I want you to say that. I want you to say that with me. There is an internet. There is an internet, and we have to accept the inevitable given that fact. So in copyright, we have to accept the inevitable of, quote, sharing, and respond by compensating artists differently, as the Green Party in Germany has proposed with their cultural flat rate. Or in the context of leaks, we have to accept the inevitability of not leaks, but data dumps, extraordinary dumps of data that facilitate access to all sorts of information, some of it good, lots of it harmful. But in response, we need to support best practices responsibly, encouraging these sites to engage in their important free speech activity in a way that minimizes the harm. Yet we do neither here. Why? These problems are hard. In the best of cases, the government's going to get it wrong. But too rarely is it the best of cases that explains why the government gets it wrong. Too rarely is a mistake here just a mistake. And it's this that I think we need to understand better. So the number one response I've gotten to coming here to New Zealand, as I flung myself from Boston here for less than 48 hours in country was, why the hell would you do that? A little bit hurtful, like, you know, because I love you guys. Why wouldn't I do that, right? No. Why would I do that? Because as hard as it is for you guys to recognize, there's something really special here. Relative to everywhere else, there's something really special. There's a high-functioning democracy here. I know you argue and bicker about which party has to be in control, but you need to really recognize some extraordinary fact about your country. This is a democracy that works. Now, by saying that, I don't mean to say that democracy here is utopia, that you don't have problems, you don't make big mistakes, but by saying there's a democracy that works, it's to say you still make mistakes, but these are mistakes that can be fixed more easily in a high-functioning democracy than elsewhere. Mistakes. So, for example, think about broadband policy. Extraordinary review by the Berkman Center, Yochai Benkler, completed last November. Looks at broadband policies across the world and asks the question, what explains what worked? Why did some countries do so well, France? Other countries do so poorly, the United States. And the answer was, the key here was open access policies. As the report says, our most surprising and significant finding is that open access policies played a core role in high-performing countries. The lowest prices and highest speeds are almost always offered by firms and markets where, in addition to an incumbent telephone company and a cable company, there's also competitors who entered the market and built their presence through the use of open access facilities. Now, New Zealand got this policy wrong at first. In 1989, you privatized your telecom companies, but there was no sector-specific regulation here. 2001, they began some sector-specific regulation, but it was tiny, pretty reticent. In 2003, the Commerce Commission explicitly refused to impose unbundling requirements. But recognizing the failure of broadband in New Zealand, in 2006, there was a radical change in government policy, forcing functional separation following the model of Britain, and resulting, as this report suggests, in an extraordinary increase in the capacity of New Zealand relative to where they were before. So New Zealand, at the time of the adoption of functional separation, was well below the OECD average penetration and well below Italy. After separation, New Zealand's penetration level reached that of the OECD average and passed that of Italy. So it was even better than the United States after this functional separation. Still not great, given the greatness of this economy, but still much better than it was. A mistake corrected. The United States also made a pretty fundamental mistake. We started on the right track. In 1996, we adopted a series of regulations for the internet that imposed open access requirement on the most important access to broadband, which was then DSL. But in 2001, after the regime change the Supreme Court gave us in bringing us Bush as the president, there was a reversal in that policy. And the United States adopted the same policy of New Zealand and the ideology that drove New Zealand originally, and totally deregulated. No obligation at all. And after 9 years, we can see the consequence of that change in policy. The United States going from #1 in broadband penetration and speeds to number 28 advertised for download speed. So we had an experiment, right? We had a policy that was much like most of the world, open access policies until 2000. The world continued in open access policies, and we diverged fundamentally. New Zealand here was a little bit counter to that. It had the bad policy, but then just after the United States diverged, it adopted the more progressive policy. And the data here shows that we, the United States, were wrong. It was a mistaken policy. It produced worse internet, embarrassingly bad internet. So the US government's response to this mistake? Obama comes in, promises to take second place to no one in supporting open and fast networks, launched the FCC on a study of how best to expand broadband in the United States. They commissioned the Benkler study. Benkler turned in the study. The FCC produced their national broadband plan. In their national broadband plan, they simply ignored what Benkler had found. A single footnote refers to the study they had commissioned, and open access is mentioned nowhere in the report. Why? As it was reported, quote, senior commission staff members have essentially conceded that lobbying pressure from the monopolies is too strong even to begin exploring open access right now. So, New Zealand and the United States make a mistake. New Zealand corrects the mistake. The United States ignores the mistake because lobbying pressure is too strong. Now, the world misses how profoundly bad government in the United States is. No, the world, not you guys. I'm talking about the world. We are not a high-functioning democracy. The effect of special interests in the United States government is pervasive and corrupting. That was not the intent of the design of our government. The framers of our Constitution gave us what they said was a republic. By a republic, they meant a representative democracy. By a representative democracy, as the Federalist Papers described, they meant a democracy dependent upon the people alone. So here was their model. The people, the government depended upon. I do my own graphics. That's pretty cool, right? The way that kind of falls down. But here's the problem, right? Congress has evolved a different dependency. Not just the people, but a dependency upon the funders. As members of Congress spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress and to make it so their party regains control, they develop a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how whatever they might do will affect their ability to raise money. And they become shape-shifters in this process, constantly adjusting their view in light of what they know is necessary to help them raise money. So Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she first went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, always lean to the green. Then to make sure nobody misunderstood her, she said, quote, he was not an environmentalist. Now this is a corruption. I don't mean a kind of brown bag quid pro quo corruption, or the corruption that our famous Rob Blagojevich was just convicted 17 counts of by engaging in crimes to buy and sell government influence. It's not corruption like that. Nothing so crude. It's not the Gilded Age. It's a dependency corruption. It's a system that's developed the wrong dependency. Congressmen who've developed the wrong dependency, not a dependency upon the people, but a dependency upon money. And that yields cynicism in the system. 75% of Americans in a poll we conducted in January said, quote, money buys results in Congress. A little bit more Democrats than Republicans, but I can guarantee you when Democrats controlled Congress, it was a little bit more Republicans than Democrats. Doesn't really matter. The point is, most Americans, 2/3 to 3/4 of Americans believe money buys results in Congress, and that yields a profound lack of trust in the government. The latest poll finds that 11% of Americans have confidence in their Congress. 11%? I should put that in some context. There were more people who believed in the British Crown at the time of the Revolution than who believe in our Congress today. Now, we need to recognize, as we look at democracies around the world, that this kind of corruption is not everywhere. And in particular, I want to suggest you recognize it's not here. And Transparency International has already named you the least corrupt nation in the world. But more importantly, special interests, though you continue to adopt this brain-dead system of funding elections through private contributions, still, special interests here are, relative to other democracies, muted. And the difference in the potential for sensible public policy is huge. It manifests itself not just with broadband. Think about intellectual property. As one of the co-founders of Creative Commons, I'm enormously proud of the work that's been done by Creative Commons here, as it's embraced the idea of sharing and spreading information broadly, and as the government has embraced the idea of using Creative Commons to spread government information broadly. And just this week released a site that enabled government agencies to go through the steps they need to guarantee their material is freely available. And the same thing with the open data movement, which started as a private movement here in New Zealand and now has been embraced by the government in an extraordinary way to guarantee that government data is open and accessible to others.